Okay, we're back for first time. I moved a tiny little bit and it killed my connection. I don't even know how they ever sold this thing. Like,
The debate starts, and we're having this wonderful comparative discussion about whether Caitlyn Jenner is greater than Moses or even greater than Jesus Christ, and finally they come to me, and I say I don't understand what Caitlyn Jenner is doing that's heroic, and I neglected.
I agree it's not heroic, but it's just you shouldn't criticize it. Like basically she like I would be saying it, but just for anyone, right? But so like she's being just doing what she wants to do, just being free, right? Don't you, right? The Ben Shapiro, you thought you were a libertarian, right? You claim to be a libertarian. Well, uh, come on, don't criticize people for just doing things their own way, and because that's basically what you're kind of implying. So, okay, you're saying he just because he's like biologically male, but like, come on, like Caitlyn wants to be called she. That is not a hard to remember thing, and you know perfectly well that Caitlyn wants to be called she, so why don't you just do it? Like, okay, so I personally try to say it as much as possible, and maybe I'll try even saying it just for like people like Ben. I'll see if I can manage to remember to do that.
To mention one part of the story. The person they'd sat next to me, because Jerry Springer producer, the person they'd sat next to me was a transgender woman named Zoe Tur, who used to be Bob Tur, who outweighed me by about 30 pounds and had a voice at least an octave lower than mine. So we're having this
Yeah,
discussion, and I say I don't
I
understand
shouldn't laugh,
what's so
but
heroic about
but
what Caitlyn Jenner has done, and he says you don't know anything about genetics, little boy. And I said, well, I know enough to know that every cell in Caitlyn Jenner's body has a Y chromosome in it.
yeah, but the point is why yeah, yeah, obviously that there's a Y chromosome, but like why even have different pronouns for different sexes? I mean, we could have different pronouns for all sorts of different characteristics. You could, for instance, have different pronouns for people who are like shorter than 1 meter 70 and people who are taller than 1 meter 70 would have a different pronoun, right? You could like have literally have different pronouns based on different hair colors, right? Uh, like why specifically sexes? There's no good reason, and that's why I think we should drop the all sexually differentiated words. I'm absolutely for gender neutral words, and that's one of the ultra silliness of the right is that they call out the silliness of the left, but they're completely blind to their own like silliness of creating needless complexity.
With ironically the exception of some of his sperm cells. And he says, well, you really don't know anything about genetics. They just keeps repeating this, little boy, you don't know anything about genetics. And finally I said, well, what are your genetics, sir? And it was the sir that set him off. Uh,
Yeah, but again, why, why
and
do
so
that?
this is live on national television. He reaches over and he grabs me by the back of the neck on national TV. You can go online, you can see the tape.
See
It's
that this is
interesting.
why,
Uh,
like like I said, I advocate for just hermaphroditism, for just complete abolition of sex, gender. What I mean, just have both male and female parts, and just act like a real man. This is one of my expressions is real man to refer to real human, because like I don't like the fact that woman is sort of longer than man as a word, because it like implies that women is a sort of a secondary thing. So instead, to put them on an equal footing, I call uh, what most people call a man, a male human. I call that a woman, like with a like a German person saying woman, like just with a V instead of a W. And so you got a woman and a woman, and and that way I can now use the term man to refer to actual real humans that aren't being idiots, and so that's what I'm going to be calling like a quote real man to because I'm doing that on purpose. I want to reclaim these expressions from these from these work people.
It was more interesting when you were part of it, let me tell you. And he reaches over and grabs him by the back of the neck, and he says, if you don't cut that out, you're going home in an ambulance. And I thought to myself, first of all, you don't go home in an ambulance.
Yeah, he's right about that.
But what I said was, that seems mildly inappropriate for a political conversation. And the point of the story is not that I'm a jackass, okay? I might be, but that's not the point of the story. The point of the
Yeah, you
story
are.
is that the other people on the panel, all of them, universally,
He's
Didn't say
scared.
to Zoe Tur, take your hands off that person. You don't get to commit acts of physical violence if you disagree or are offended by something. The universal response of the entire panel was, how dare you say that to Zoe? You knew that you were going to offend Zoe, which is, of course, when I said facts, that's when I said facts don't care about your feelings. And so I said, okay, well, it doesn't matter. I'm not interested in changing the facts of the situation to fit Zoe Tur's feelings. But everybody thought that the violence was justified. They thought it was all okay. It was fine. By the way, the violent threats continued. After that segment, Zoe Tur is walking off and growls at me, I'll see you in the parking lot. And then, goes on Twitter a little bit later and threatens to curb stomp me, all of which I have to say I thought was very unladylike behavior.
Yeah. I
But the idea here is that I had microaggressed, and therefore I was to be met with macroaggressions. It was so terrible. Whatever I had said, the word, like, I was brought up to believe that you say sir to men and you say ma'am to women, and he was a biological man, so I was going to call him sir. But that was a microaggression, and therefore I deserve to be met with.
Yeah, he's being on purpose shitty, but I know I myself am very much the first person to be like a person who will not do the politically correct thing if it like or not so much the politically correct, yeah, like politically correct not just in the leftist sense, but also like to not like say sir in a more traditional, society. I'll just sort of say just be like casual to everyone equally. And like precisely, I want to do that because I want to be rational and I want to treat people equally and in a rational fashion. So I mean, I could see myself doing that kind of thing, but just not that specific thing because in any case, I think he and she and stupid is stupid. But like, if I didn't think it was dumb, then I likely would have done the same thing. Um, but as it is, I just prefer saying it. So let's see if I can. I'm sure I already said he a bunch of times to refer to Ben just right now, but I'll try to really just say it for everyone.
Violence. And this is the dangerous part about the microaggression philosophy. At University of Missouri, when they had the big hubbub last year, the police department actually asked students to report hurtful.
All right, listen, I'm gonna just gotta look to see if I've got all my videos here. Yeah, yeah, I've got them. Good.
Words. They said if somebody says something hurtful, call up the PD. This is called fascism, gang. That's totalitarianism. And this reaches ridiculous proportions. I mean, at Brandeis University, they had a situation a couple of years ago where the Brandeis Asian.
Yeah. Well, it's making me think like on Twitch, because I got suspended for 7 days for using the N word. Again, it's a controversial thing. You can support me or not. I did it on purpose with the idea that the N word, uh, well, basically, it's still being used by the African American community. It's being widely used. It's being even promoted in the media by anyone who like is being tolerated by anyone who has some amount of African American in their genes, right? And like I was thinking, well, it's kind of racist to say it is racist to say that it's okay for some a particular group of people to use a certain word but not others. So I kind of thought, okay, well, I'm going to be using this word to, to precisely to defy that racial unfairness. And then I thought I'm going to be maybe using it precisely to refer to pretty much anyone who's an idiot, since black people themselves often use the word as an insult. Okay, I mean, not to at least not quite exactly an insult, but a sort of in a deprecative way. They'll say, "Don't be a n," right? And so I yeah, that's what I did, and then I got banned for 7 days. And but so the idea is I did it not to refer to black people, but to refer to idiotic people, and and I like doing that, and I mean I like it in the sense that it's a powerful, again, not because I'm racist, but because it's been made taboo. It's a powerful word, and so I feel that it can jolt people, and I want to be able to jolt people, and so I would apply it to just everyone who's being an idiot, and specifically, like what I'm calling orc and subhuman. Um, and so, yeah, and so then the people who got me banned, I figured they were right-wing trolls because I'm not really used to, because I know, I've encountered plenty of sort of more right-wing leaning trolls on internet, and like left-wing trolling wasn't really a thing for me. So I just imagined that these people were right wing, and I get the impression that they actually were. I mean, I get the impression that these people actually were black people, but my my impression was that they just didn't have any particular political beliefs, or possibly they actually were Republicans, but were somehow also tied to the sort of this kind of weird lefty snowflake stuff when it came to black people specifically. And so, in fact, I'm now thinking maybe it even was actually more like these uh these weird lefty identity politics people that did this and that were trolling just as much because I don't know. My impression is that they just were pretty dumb, sort of ghetto people who like just don't really know much. I mean, they don't really aren't even able to form much of an opinion beyond trying to get people who say the N-word council. Like that's literally like their only political idea is doing that. So, yeah, yeah. So it's possible that you have these lefty sort of people be like maybe they were actually responsible for getting me banned on Twitch. I don't know. I don't know. I just I kind of find it surprising just because to me, trolls are like a sort of more right-wing phenomenon. But I know that like left-wingers can be like kind of, you know, like that, like just very quick to take offense and to not really be open-minded. But I don't know. I don't know.
American Students Association, they put out an installation in the public square to bring to bring attention to microaggressions. It was a wall with all sorts of microaggression phrases, and somebody reported them. They had to take it down because it was a microaggression. So once you rid the world of all the trigger warnings and the microaggressions, of course, then you finally have your magical safe space. And again, the implication is clear. If you are subjected to language that offends you, you are now unsafe. In which case, I spend my entire life in an unsafe area, even though, aside from Zoe Tur, I haven't been physically accosted in a long time. You require the protection with men with guns. If people disagree with you, you require segregated areas. At University of Missouri, the black students actually dictated that none of the leftist white students be allowed to protest next to them because it violated their
Oh no.
segregated safe space, to which
Yeah, that's like total apartheid. That's like ultra racist. That why yeah, these people they think they're progressive, but they're actually not. They've like done because pretty much everyone is an orc, right? So when orcs, like some orcs say, okay, we'll stop being orcs, we'll try to be real men, and the problem is that they sort of start in the right direction, but because they're orcs, that ends up veering, and it ends up veering so much that actually ends up completely like reverting and going back the very opposite direction that they started out, and it actually ends up being pure regressivism. And now that kind of stuff is regressivism. It's like making things go back towards the Middle Ages to back towards tribalism, which I very much dislike.
the KKK said, awesome, Sep- separate and also equal, fantastic. Safe spaces are safe in the way that the Matrix is safe. It's wonderful and it's happy until you realize it's all fake, and society doesn't actually operate by these idiotic rules, and that these ridiculous, stupid rules actually make you into a person who does nasty things. Take, for example, someone that I'm sure some of you know, a girl named Geraldine Luther. The girl who was caught on video shrieking like an insane nut job at Nicholas Christakis. As you all know, and I'm lecturing to the people on tape now, you all go to the schools, so you know, of course, the controversy began because Christakis and his wife Erica, who serve as heads of the residential college Silliman, weren't willing to go along with the PC regime. Before Halloween, the Intercultural Affairs Council, which sounds like a useless bunch if I've ever heard of one, sent an email to students telling them not to wear costumes that would threaten our sense of community. Threaten our sense of community. Because as we all know, the Holocaust started because of costuming mistakes. This being rather vague, Erica, a professor of developmental psychology, sent out an email asking, have we lost faith in young people's capacity, in your capacity to exercise self-censure through social norming, and also in your capacity to ignore or reject things that trouble you? Well, it turns out you should have lost faith in young people's ability to do any of those things and not be stupid, precious snowflake losers. Over 700 students and faculty and alum signed an open letter whining. In your email, you ask students to look away if costumes are offensive, as if the degradation of our cultures and people and the violence that grows out of it is something that we can't ignore. Forgive me, was there a giant Halloween costume pogrom sometime in the recent past at this university? Did I miss it? Did I miss the part where people dressed up in Halloween costumes and then went around killing black folks? Like, really, when was this time that the violence that grew out of Halloween costumes was super threatening to minorities on this campus? Seriously, maybe I missed it. So Nicholas went outside and he encountered 100 students in the residential college quad, and the intrepid social justice warrior Luther confronted him, and there she screams at him and told him it was his job to create a place of comfort for students as though she was a small child needing a nap. When he said that that was not, in fact, his job, she decided that screaming at him would be the proper solution, like my 2.5-year-old daughter would do, demanded he apologize, told him to be quiet, called him disgusting, and wailed, "Who the fuck hired you?" It turned out, by the way, she was actually on the search team that brought him to Yale. Nonetheless, the gauntlet had been thrown. 1,000 of you Yale students then joined a march of resistance. You guys are so brave, all you people resisting the, 3 rounds of applause for you folks, so brave, marching against the sexy nurses on Halloween. The students demanded that all the undergraduates take useless ethnic study courses, which are only good for meeting chicks, as I know when I took Jewish studies courses. They also qualify you, by the way, to be a useless ethnic studies professor at some point. They also recommended that there be mental health professionals to join all the cultural centers, which actually might be not such a bad idea. They wanted the title master to be abolished, and they wanted the Christakises to be fired. And the Yale administration, because they're sad and pathetic, they caved. So Dean Holloway, he said that he supported the IAC Halloween costume guidelines. He called them exactly right. They increased the budget for the cultural centers, and they abolished the title master. Of course, the word master comes from the Latin word magister, which means chief, head, director, or teacher, and in academic settings has always meant expertise in a subject, which is why some of you, I'm sure, here are earning master's degrees. I don't think anyone here holds slaves. Show of hands, slaveholders, because you're earning a master's degree. Does a free slave come along with it? I didn't think so. All of this nonsense makes people totally crazy. It just makes them insane. It makes you stupid and emotionally stunted, like Geraldine Luther and the people who agree. You're all being made crazy. Jonathan Haidt is a sociologist, professor of psychology at NYU, and he says the recent collegiate trend of uncovering allegedly racist, sexist, classist, or otherwise discriminatory microaggressions does not incidentally teach students to focus on small or accidental slights. Its purpose is to get students to focus on them and then relabel the people who have made such remarks as aggressors. This is actually the opposite for the psych majors in the room. This is the opposite of one of the only forms of psychology that's ever been known to work at all, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, where you have a chain of thoughts that lead you to be depressed, and your psychologist says maybe you should break those chains of thoughts and maybe determine whether the person actually meant to offend you. Maybe you should think whether this is something worth getting upset about. This vicious cycle creates adults unwilling to face up to reality, determined to blame the world for their problems, convinced that the more they claim offense, the more they deserve from others. It's not just un-American, it's unhealthy, and it makes people evil. Professor Roy Baumeister writes a great book called Evil, Inside Human Violence and Cruelty, and he says that evil springs from idealism that turns to violence, unjustified self-esteem, and hypersensitivity. Does any of this sound familiar? Self-appointed victimhood is really, really dangerous stuff, and that's what all of these terms in the end are all about. And millions of students are learning it each year, which is why a November 2015 Pew poll showed that 40% of millennials, people aged 18 to 34, I'm 32, so we're all in the same group here, believe the government should be able to prevent people from making, quote, statements that are offensive to minority groups. The government should do that. Okay, this would involve repeal of the First Amendment. But that is the logic of a philosophy that prizes protection of feelings above protection of individual rights. America is the greatest experiment in the history of planet Earth with the best value system. And it's a value system that, unfortunately, the left.
I know I said that, but I mean, I don't know, like I'm saying that from a perspective that also wants to abolish the United States. So obviously, you sort of it's meant to be taken not entirely seriously. Um, I think when people really sort of believe that the United States is just like this incredible, amazing thing that like is like it is in a way, it is in some ways, but like at the same time, like get over yourself. One thing I'm disappointed is that nobody seems to like ever be enthusiastic about that. Like, because people do like look up to the United States. Actually, people are always like listening to like, watching Hollywood movies, listening to American music. I mean, people do absolutely look up to the United States. It's not true that like everybody just hates the United States and that they think people like they think that it's like, a bad thing. Like literally, they're inspired in so many ways by the United States culture. But unfortunately, I tried to do this, like cold approaching stuff too. try to virginify myself, and I was thinking maybe that would help to be American, but nope, it like doesn't help at all. So, yeah, that's unfortunate.
And the campus left have been trying to destroy now for 3 generations. Nobody is better off in a system of fake diversity, or preaching phantom white privilege, or whining about trigger warnings, or being offended by microaggressions, or retreating to fake safe spaces that don't really exist in the real world. We are all better off when we embrace fundamentally good values, when we share values of responsibility and decency together. So what are some of those common fundamental values we should be teaching? Let's start with the ones embodied in the Constitution: freedom of speech, of religion, of the press, of assembly and petition, and let's add in some basic civic values. Don't have babies without being married. Don't engage in crime. Don't do violence.
No, I please don't say that married stuff, okay? Please, 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 please. Don't say that. That is not a basic value. That is not a basic value. I repeat, you don't need to be married. There's no why that is not freedom, okay? That is not if you want freedom, let people do it and kids will be all right not being in a marriage, okay?
Violence to people who disagree with you. If we're all
That the
better,
rest, see the rest I agree with him. That's the thing. But that because he himself, of course, he was like even he was virgin until marriage. But like that's so stupid. Like don't do that. Don't do that. Especially yeah, no, like it's 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 bad for mental health. I would be much better off if I managed to do it. I've been wanting to do it for over 15 years now, and it's not worked. But um. I really don't wait. Like for me, by the time I was 15, it was already too late. I was mentally completely messed up already. So like you should really do it before you reach 15. Like there's a quinceañera, right? It's like that's the Hispano-Americans coming of age thing, and you should do it already. That you should already have done it by then. You should already have like a girlfriend and had sex and stuff like that by then. Otherwise you're just gonna it just I don't know, your mind is gonna be completely just like traumatized forever by like just the feeling of being rejected and of just being unsuccessful and of just not having properly matured at a proper age. Um, and the feeling of having missed out on so much for so much time. Um, so I really disagree with that.
to one another, not in terms of being oversensitive or worrying we're all going to offend one another, but in assuming that we probably will at some point offend one another from time to time, and that's okay. We can live together. You don't have to care what I think. I don't have to care what you think. That's the wonderful thing about America. That doesn't mean we should go around insulting everybody, but it does mean we have to respect facts as facts and opinions as opinions and insults as insults, and they're not all the same thing. And then we don't have to shut down debate. We don't have to strong-arm protesters and destroy the country in order to make ourselves feel good. We can actually feel good about what we share together. A constitutional system that prizes individual liberty and individual responsibility, a simple goodness that agrees to disagree about what we do in our own lives, but agrees generally that being a mensch, being a decent human being, is required of everybody. We share not our own truths, this phrase, my truth, there's no such thing as your truth. There's just the truth and then there's your opinion. We don't share our own truths, but actual factual truths and actual standards. We're all in this together, and we're all going to have to share a country. So let's stop letting the fascist left separate us with buzzwords and tyranny of subjective feelings. If we do that, then finally we'll be able to build what the founders foresaw and what Martin Luther King dreamed of and what generations fought and bled and died to achieve. A society of values rather than races, of commonality rather than polarization, and of truth rather than lies. Thanks so much. Happy to take your questions.
Okay, should I stop now or should I keep going? Maybe just one question. Let's wait.
And my own.
Okay, no. Guess I just have to wait. It's gonna be pretty
Thanks so much.
fast.
Alrighty. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, we're gonna
Okay, so let's
take
some questions, and my only rule, you guys will handle the questioning, but my rule is if you're left, you get to go first, because it's more interesting and more fun. Do you dare? That's it.
Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Is this on? Okay. Why are you doing this? Is it for fame?
I don't understand. This being.
I'm asking, why do you give these lectures and say these things? Is it because it's going to make you more famous?
It's true, he does have that sort of lefty voice of sort of like he's a bit just kind of mellowed from being stoned.
No, if I wanted to be more famous, then I'd write a TV show and take off my pants. I mean, no.
Well, but it's a good question. Why is Ben Shapiro doing this? I think he generally believes in what he's doing, and he's really just doing it uh, to sort of further his cause. But I also think that he is, of course, doing it for the money, and also for the fame, I'm sure. But like, from the, uh, I think he's doing it for everything. Okay, but I still think that fundamentally he wants to, further his beliefs. But yeah, he's obviously getting paid, and yeah.
The purpose of giving these lectures is to speak basic truths to generally crowds of people who either disagree with those basic truths. I encourage more.
Is kind of a of all that stuff.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Okay. At least it's not as shitty as those sort of when you've got a crowd that's majorly like young males that you'd have like much more sort of aggressive reactions towards a person like that. So I'm glad here that you've got like adults which keep things like like old adults and women and stuff who keep things civil.
What's going on, Ben? Love your program. Love all that stuff.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I think as
Yeah, he looks like a right
kind
winger.
of a millennial conservative, constitutional conservative, one of the biggest threats and one of the hardest things to respond to from people on the left is when they talk about the utopia of the Nordic countries, because they are oftentimes armed with a lot of facts in regards to the efficiency of their public programs and things to that effect. So how would you recommend responding to those claims of the utopianism of the Nordic countries?
Okay, so the first thing that's important to notice about the Nordic countries is that the Nordic countries are, by and large, extraordinarily ethnically homogenous. So they're not comparable in terms of and culturally homogenous as well. So Vermont looks a lot like Norway. Right? Bernie Sanders' philosophy works in Vermont and it works in Norway, but it only works for a temporary period of time because Vermont doesn't have its own defense budget, and really neither does Norway. Right? We've been paying for the Nordic countries' defense budgets for a long time. Also, it's worthwhile noting that the taxes in these countries are extraordinarily high, and the countries are going bankrupt anyway. So for about a 15-year period, 20-year period, the Nordic countries have been experiencing extraordinarily slow growth, which has led them to actually elect more right-wing governments.
Again, just to answer to this, like it's largely true, but like much of the reason for this you have to bear in mind is like there's this phenomenon of like capital flight, right? Which is why lots of countries are unable to enact excessively high like taxation on places because like within their own countries. I mean, because then you'll have all the rich people that leave, and that will to a large extent leads to you know the sort of the economy not doing so well as a result of people leaving. And so that is kind of one objection is maybe if the economy isn't doing so well, it's because of capital flight. And so yeah, I think it's uh, like in any case, like if a completely socialist system, like lots of purely socialist systems, did manage to see a fair amount of economic growth. Um, I don't see why like the Nordic kind of countries wouldn't be able to see growth, since they're still much more capitalistic, and in fact they are completely capitalistic. But it's just, I mean, no, of course there's government stuff, but like it's not less capitalist really in the way they function than other Western countries. They just okay, they have higher taxes, yeah. Um, so I guess what I mean by that is that like these Nordic countries do work, and it's perfectly feasible to do it, and especially in a country like the US, which is bigger, I think it's all the more feasible because and especially because in the U.S. like you can't escape you can't escape the IRS. So yeah, it's it would be it would actually be plenty doable. Um, yeah.
on economics and deregulate their economies, because it turns out people don't like paying twice the amount that it costs for a normal car. Right? The income tax rate in places like Denmark for middle class people, not for upper class people, for middle class people is like 60%. So it's easy for students to say 60% sounds good, but you all go to Yale, which means that eventually you'll have a job that pays you enough that you'll be paying a high percentage of your income in taxes, and it ain't that much fun. There's a reason that Denmark, all these countries are now turning away from this, and they've been living off the back of America paying for their defense budget for a very long time. So you have the privilege of not having to pay your own defense budget. You also have
Again, I'm just sort of talking about my system. There'd be no need for defense budget, right? Because you'd finally stop doing that idiocy of nationalism. Um, and and yeah, of course you wouldn't have the risk of capital flight. And in any case, you'd get lots of them. The poorer you are, the more you'd get in basic income, so that like you'd get lots of the money back through basic income. In any case, so like yeah, my system doesn't suffer from like any problem like that inherently. Sure, you'd be taxed like 50% on your income, but that is fine because basically, who cares? Because the whole point is that you don't have like a fundamental right to like an income that the market gives you, right? Uh, Basically, the idea is that everybody should be given the opportunity for a decent life, and that is the basic income. And then the idea that the income that you get as a worker is just an incentive to make you work because the economy needs production for the consumers to be able to have stuff to consume. But fundamentally, like it's a consumer-oriented ideology, which means that you, as a worker, or as a person who's obtaining money from the system, from the market system, you don't have like a fundamental like right to earn any specific amount, right? You're allowed to engage in the system and be rewarded however much that might amount to. But the whole purpose of this is just to stimulate production. And yeah.
a group of what can best be described as of upper education people who have grown up in Western countries with a particular set of values, and socialism, at least in the Nordic way, not full government ownership of resources, but high redistribution of income, that is capable of lasting for a certain period of time, but even there it collapses.
That's not true. Like USSR socialism did not actually collapse. It could have kept on going. Like the USSR collapsed because there was no political will to keep it together, but it wasn't that the economic system collapsed. And also like I mean yeah, the GDP per capita just was growing pretty steadily the whole time. Um, and like the Nordic thing, the reason there is again more an issue of capital flight, and yeah, it's largely that. So I mean, my thing again, this would not collapse after a certain amount of time.
Hi, Ben.
Howdy.
So, unconscious bias is a concept well documented in psychological studies, which is basically that people associate negative things with people of color and positive things with whites. So, if that is true, given that that is true, how does white privilege not exist?
Okay, so you're asking about unconscious bias. I apologize because it's kind of echoey, but the question was, if there is unconscious bias, just to repeat it so I'm making sure I get it right. If there is unconscious bias, how does white privilege not exist?
The question is, given that there is unconscious bias, how does white privilege not exist?
So number one, so when I speak about white privilege, yes, so when I speak about white privilege, I'm speaking specifically about behavior. Okay, there have been no studies, and really I've looked at these studies, the connection between what they call implicit bias, this is their favorite phrase now, implicit bias, unconscious bias, and biased behavior has yet to be proven at any level that is even remotely necessary to be used in, for example, a courtroom, which is why it's never been used in a courtroom. It is also true that there is no way, there really isn't, there's been no proven way to alleviate what they call unconscious bias, which means that we're ghost hunting. So what I would suggest is that if there is unconscious bias, and I'll acknowledge the possibility or the reality of unconscious bias, if there is, then I need you to I don't care about what's in people's heads so much as what they do. So if you point me to a racist behavior, Don't worry, I'll let you respond. If you point me to a racist behavior, I'm happy to stand alongside you and protest it. What I can't do is protest about things in people's head that I don't know about because I'm not a mind reader.
Okay, so that's a really interesting response, and to that I have two questions. Firstly, what I've heard you say that this is something that, the way people think doesn't affect their behavior. So that's the first thing you've said. So I'm really curious if you can kind of give me another example of a thought that somebody has which doesn't affect their behavior. Like, do people who, support Trump not vote for him? Like, I'm very curious about that.
Yes.
And secondly, so the second thing that I want to ask is that if it's something it's hard to fix, does it mean we shouldn't do anything about it? Because you said, I don't know if we can change how people think. Does that mean we shouldn't try?
I mean, first of all, not a great impression. But beyond that, but my voice isn't that low. But beyond that, as far as the first question, which is, do people have thoughts that don't manifest in behavior? Yes, all the time.
For instance?
For instance, every thought that you have about walking up here and strangling me right now. I assume like we have thoughts all the time that don't manifest in behavior, and this is true every single day. We consider thoughts that cross our minds. And the problem with unconscious bias is the idea is you don't even know that you're having the thought, right? So how can you stop it if you don't even know that you're having it? But then we should be able to gauge the unconscious bias and its impact on behavior. That's why it's unconscious bias as opposed to conscious bias. The idea behind unconscious bias is that it's not even a ghost, it's a ghost of a ghost, because you don't even know you're having the thought. So people, the whole idea behind diversity training is the idea that you can retrain people to stop their chain of thought in order so that it doesn't manifest in behavior. I don't think that every thought manifests in behavior. If it did, then every time a man saw a good-looking woman walk down the street, a straight man saw a good-looking woman down the street, we'd have a real mess on our hands. So the second question, the idea was a little too broad for me to respond to, which is just because something is tough, don't we have to face up to it? Yes, we have to face up to tough things all the time. And one of the tough things I would suggest that we face up to is that you have a lot more control over your own behavior and the decisions you make than the supposedly widespread unconscious bias of people you've never met.
Okay, yeah, I gotta agree. I'm gonna stop with that, and I agree. By and large, I agree. Obviously, this unconscious bias is not a nice thing, but I don't really know what else one might. I don't really know what one might do. Oh, wait a minute. All right, so this is a video from 2016. Oh yeah, I had to stop that.